We are rapidly heading into a new era of authoritarian technocracy, where previously highly regarded principles like that of the rule of law and democracy have now been almost completely eroded, certainly in any matters involving government or public-private partnerships interests. I have for the longest time tried to explain and demonstrate to people how the social engineering experiment and the public persecution of me, Stephen Bell, has from its very inception in late 2008 to now never been about investigating me for serious sex crimes or even terrorism, nor has the social engineering experiment been conceived and run for entertainment purposes, despite how profusely government, intelligence agencies and public-private partnerships have endlessly tried to indoctrinate people to believe these pretexts, specifically by running never-ending propaganda and PSYOP campaigns that have been broadcasted to much of the Western world especially, in which I feature as the main protagonist without me really having any involvement in actual reality. Their main theme in their propaganda and psychological operations has always been to get as many people as possible to hate and despise me. This they have achieved with great success on an industrial scale simply by smearing and or labeling me as a heinous sex criminal and terrorist from time to time, and everything in between whenever it suits their propaganda narratives from day to day. For around 18 years they have been following the same justification modus operandi, and yet to this day they are still fixated on this same theme, notwithstanding that I, Stephen Bell, have never once been charged, prosecuted or even questioned by police for any of the hundreds of serious criminal offences that they have been labelling me guilty for, or at least smearing me with. One would have thought that the general public would realise that this complete lack of corresponding police investigation and prosecution would immediately equate that the entire narratives given around the purposes and meaning behind the social engineering experiment have been fraudulent from the very beginning. However, objectivity and common sense is very easily influenced or even denied in the minds of the masses when they are being targeted by governments, intelligence agencies and public-private partnerships who are running constant psychological operations on them with such great success. They have gotten people accustomed to setting aside not only common sense but also the principles of the rule of law under the most bogus pretexts. Frankly speaking, it is fairly clear to see that the introduction and implementation of authoritarian technocracy has now, for all intents and purposes, been successfully carried out through the global social engineering experiment. So I am quickly becoming a liability to the powers that shouldn't be, and my usefulness as the unwilling boogeyman pretext for their social engineering experiment on the masses is dubious at best, which puts me in a very precarious situation that is evolving to be more and more dangerous as time progresses. The trajectory has been very clear to see since the beginning of 2024 and to this day in 2026, where there are undeniable and all-encompassing efforts to tighten their stranglehold on the little life that I have left to make it completely unbearable. Thereby they are trying to coerce an end to it. When this ultimately fails, there is a strong likelihood that the US, which is the main arbiter of the social engineering experiment, especially with this sitting Trump administration, will seek to have me extradited to the US under bogus indictment. If the Danish government denies the request, citing the European Convention on Human Rights, which of course should prevent such a legal request, there is a likely scenario that the Trump administration might even have me renditioned to a black site. That is how lawless everything has become. In this latter half of the documentary, I'll be going through evidence that directly prove how I'm being subjected to extrajudicial crippling sanctions, as well as cruel and unusual punishment. In my previous documentary called The Technocratic Apartheid State of Denmark, I clearly proved that external forces, i.e. government agencies and their proxies, are directly prohibiting and or severely restricting people's access from doing any business with me or my company, One Stop Engine Shop. These restrictions and prohibitions have become so all-encompassing that they can be rightly juxtaposed with outright legal sanctions that are typically placed against countries or persons of power thereof, which the West are in conflict with. In this instance, this is all being done entirely without legal justification. Thereby the general public's rights and freedoms, as well as my own, are being systematically violated by foreign agencies who are running the social engineering experiment. On November 10th, 2025, I predicted how the illegal restrictions and prohibitions were rapidly on a trajectory of becoming outright bans on the public at large from being allowed to do any business with me or One Stop Engine Shop, a prediction that has now materialised for all intents and purposes. Throughout November, December and now well into January of 2026, they have for all intents and purposes prohibited me from earning any money whatsoever, only allowed token sales of no real value. The 2 token sales that were allowed were so only to prevent me from being able to claim definitively that they are prohibiting all sales at One Stop Engine Shop for the last 9 weeks and counting. Notwithstanding, these prohibitions are now so all-encompassing that they have the exact same effect as outright bans. This is just another good example of how petty the intelligence agencies micromanaging this situation are. Going through my accounting for the year of 2025, an even more clear pattern emerges because of the last 6 months of 2025, my turnover more than halved from the first 6 months of the year, going from 65,630 Danish kroner to a mere 28,750, which is a minuscule amount of sales that is equivalent of a typical month of sales in 2023. And it gets worse because in the last 3 months of 2025, my turnover was only 5,040 Danish kroner, most of which occurred in September 2025. So it couldn't be any more clear to see how there is a maximum pressure campaign being levelled against me at this very moment, which has left me destitute over Christmas and now well into the new year. You might be tempted to think that this is just another small business that is failing because granted that happens all the time. That, however, couldn't be further from the truth in regard to One Stop Engine Shop, which is very easily proven in the statistical data for my web shop, which shows that I have had an increase in website traffic of 22% compared to 2023, where my turnover was 252,000 Danish kroner versus that of 2025, which only amounts to 100,800, which is a staggering 150% less turnover despite having an increase in website traffic of 22% in 2025. And it gets even more worse or obvious looking at the conversion rate, that's the website traffic that is generally understood to amount to sales, which is normally 2 to 3%. However, one might say I'm selling more of a niche product, that being 2-stroke engines and the like. So for argument's sake, let's use 1% conversion rate as the bare minimum. That's still 324 sales that I should have had in 2025 under any circumstance. However, as a direct result of being subjected to illegal sanctions that prohibit people from actually purchasing from One Stop Engine Shop or me, in contrast, they have only allowed 37 sales in total for the entire year of 2025. When I started my business in 2020, my turnover was 149,250. That's almost 50,000 kroner more than my turnover in 2024 and 25. Despite my business has grown exponentially since 2020, attracting way more visitors to my web shop. As well as looking at my stock in various places where I have my ads. Furthermore, for the first 6 months of 2020, I didn't even have a web shop and my stock of engines was probably 4 times less than it was in 2024 and till now. So there can be no denying it. There are crippling illegal sanctions being placed on me, Stephen Bell, both nationally and internationally, through extrajudicial measures that are being policed and communicated to people all around the world by foreign government agencies or through public-private partnerships or both. The undeniable patterns that I have demonstrated are not only blatantly obvious in regard to One Stop Indian Shop or the 3-year-long prohibition from me selling my CLI beefer. The same kind of pattern emerges in regard to the sleep deprivation that I am systematically being subjected to, especially in late 2025 and into 2026, which mirrors exactly that of late 2024, which I happened to do lots of reports about at the time to remind people I'm being systematically and continuously sleep deprived for months on end. I'm only allowed to sleep the bare minimum, typically 3 to 5 hours a day, and the sleep I'm allowed often gets broken into 2 or more periods of sleep. Not to mention I'm often spending between 10 to 14 hours to get only 3 to 5 hours of rubbish sleep, as I am being heavily disrupted throughout this entire period. So it is unmistakable. They are doing everything they can remotely to put me under as much pressure as humanly possible. They are undoubtedly seeking my demise through covert action, which they are simultaneously publicizing all over the world. A sort of perverted demonstration of their power under this new emerging authoritarian technocracy. I'm basically a non-citizen subjected to arbitrary rule, not by my own country's law or government, instead by foreign agencies and public-private partnerships, like that of Palantir, that are very much involved in the global social engineering experiment, as recently confirmed by its CEO, Alex Karp, who in a speech from 22nd of May 2025 acknowledges the modus operandi used in the program. He even brags about how successful they have been in ushering in social change through the public persecution of me, Stephen Bell, primarily through ridicule and demonization, as well as making me, their enemy, extremely poor, a way to hamper my abilities to defend myself against the slew of directed energy weapons and emerging neurosciences that are so heavily reliant on in the social engineering experiment. Without those technological capabilities, I would not have any problem sleeping, and I would be very productive in whatever I do, and thereby creating more problems for them. Before I leave you with the bragging words of Palantir CEO Alex Karp, I just want to preface, as time progresses and their pressure tactics ultimately fail, they will undoubtedly seek more direct measures against me, first through proxy, then they will ultimately seek to have me set up in some kind of show trial. Even assassination is not off the table. If and when that happens, they will undoubtedly make it look like a suicide or something gang related.
The US government was viewed as kind of stupid, which in Silicon Valley is worse than being bad. And so we were very controversial, and that's changed a lot, partly because people realized it was wrong, and quite frankly because if somebody makes a lot of money on something, then it must be right. So we've changed the world by humiliating people and getting rich. It's the most effective way for social change, is humiliate your enemy and make them poor. And that's how social change actually happens. And